Welcome to the 18th annual Ag Jobs Bringing a Greater Vision. This event is a collaboration between Cal State Monterey Bay's College of Business and College of Science and the Grower Shipper Foundation. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Western Growers, for making it possible to provide lunch for all attendees, and KAZU for participating as our official media sponsor. This year's event is focused on smarter agriculture, feeding more, impacting less. We begin with a fireside chat hosted by Dennis Donahue. Dennis is the director of the Western Growers Center for Innovation and Technology in Salinas, California, where he drives ag tech initiatives, bolsters innovation programming, and spearheads business development. Dennis is joined on stage by our special guest, Brandy DeCarli. Brandy is an entrepreneur and founding partner and CEO of Farm from a Box, a modular farm system which strengthens local farms, enhancing the competitiveness of small-sized producers through clean technology and improved market access. She currently serves on the board of directors for Heifer International, advancing smallholder farmers' incomes globally, and advises the Climate Resolute Coalition to drive climate and gender goals at the corporate level. She is a respected global speaker and has addressed topics like technology's role in climate resilience, economic empowerment, and women's leadership at the COP Convention, TEDx, and the Explorers Club Annual Summit. She advocates for collaboration and innovation, believing compassion and connection are vital for sustainable change. Please join us in welcoming Dennis and Brandy to the stage.
Why don't you tell us how you spent your weekend, Brandy?
I spent the weekend supporting an organization called Swim Across America, fighting cancer and being able to help fund research and patient programs with all of the funds held locally. So if there's one thread that goes through all of my work, it's local, 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 local.
And how long was it in San Francisco this weekend?
Yeah, for anybody that certainly was in this heat over the past few days, it was 97 in San Francisco. I think it was well timed to be able to get in the water and go for a swim.
Yep. So I was going to say you were more than happy to take the plunge into the bay. Wetsuit not required this go around. So anyway, thanks for joining us. When you envisioned putting this program together, Brandy's name immediately came to mind, and I said, "Boy, if I could just get her to come out and visit with you all." And fortunately, she agreed to do that. So before we a little bit about Farm from a Box, which is just a fascinating endeavor. Talk about your background and the run up to Farm from a Box, how you got there. And
yeah, like a lot of things in life, as many of you students will learn, you don't always take a straight path. And I definitely did not take a straight path. I thought I was going to get into a career of being an artist or being a scientist, not agriculture. And my background is not in agriculture. But when you really see a need, you start opening up different opportunities for yourself. And agriculture is really the nexus that pulls together so many different things. And as has already been spoken, it's business, it's supply chain, it's technology, it's engineering, it's science, it's plant science, it's nature-based solutions. And so agriculture is about as important as it gets. It's a space that I'm really honored to be involved in now.
So you're a product of the UC system.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Cheers.
there you go. And a lot of folks don't realize Berkeley is actually, and you see Santa Cruz has now joined the ranks as one of the land grant universities in the state. But everybody knows about Davis and Riverside. They don't necessarily connect Berkeley with agriculture. So, but we met many years ago. Talk about Farm from a Box and just how that specific idea came to you. And then let's kind of get into the journey, because there's the business side of it, but then the other thing is, and CSU, I think in my mind, has a pretty fair entrepreneurial environment. They do a lot of terrific things here. So that issue of just even how you go about being an entrepreneur and what you got to be ready for.
Yeah, happy to. And I will just share one other thing before we get into that, which is the growth in agriculture in the academic environment parallels the growth in the importance of agriculture in the business environment and how it actually impacts our lives. So this is such an important and monumentally growing space. So I'm really, really excited for all of you to explore what's happening in agriculture as a career path. For my own path, business partner over there who's sitting with his glasses on and filming, we've worked together for years And we actually started more from the philanthropic side of seeing where aid was going, where it wasn't, and how we could approach things in a much more efficient, transparent way where people know where their money is going. And we really saw through a number of our projects that there was a big opportunity to connect technology to be able to help small local growers be able to grow more with less and make sure that we're providing some of those foundational infrastructural solutions, power, water, cold storage. Some of these things just simply do not exist. And so we really started there with how can we make sure that we're enabling small local growers with the tools that they need.
I don't know what a farm from a box is. When a module shows up, what is it?
We've often referred to it as the Switzerland of small local farming. But what it really is it's a modular system that drops in, has solar power, so it's 100% providing renewable energy. There's a solar powered pump that can connect to whatever the water access point is, drip irrigation that goes out to support whatever crop you're growing at a regenerative level, outdoor production. And then the inside of the structure is a walk-in solar powered cold storage. Surrounding that hardware, how important software is and making sure that we're connecting that can happen. So we also provide Wi-Fi access so that we can track and monitor what's going on in the world. And all the more important things we're doing to connect in digital market access for local growers too, because market access and livelihood development is incredibly important for really enhancing the competitiveness.
Pick up a little bit on the philanthropic side, because when we first started having conversations, what was your customer base going to look like?
Yeah.
And how were you going to scale it? And as I recall, we used to have conversations about, very serious issues in the world, the refugee populations. And, you've spent time, the UN and looking at places in other parts of the world that, really dropping a farm from a box in there could, just be a real lifesaver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you even see what's happening with the victims of this hurricane. When we see climate change disasters that happen, what do people need? They need infrastructure in order to be able to get up and running again. So in the very beginning, when Dennis and I, when we first connected, we were really focused on how do we apply a technological solution as an enabling mechanism within humanitarian development. So that, again, instead of short-term food aid, you're really providing these communities with the tools that they need. And sometimes there's just an infrastructural gap, and that's what really needs to be met. That, as we know, has now expanded. We have worked with the United Nations, we've worked in refugee settlements, we've worked with indigenous communities that definitely do not have a lot of access in a lot of the areas that they're working in. And those things still apply, and unfortunately are growing, as we know if we look at the news. But it also goes beyond that. It's not just a humanitarian solution. It's how do we build strong local food systems here, right? How do we make sure that local growers have the tools that they need to be as competitive and earn as much for their high quality crops as they possibly can? So we're still focused on the humanitarian side, but really supporting local growers all through North America and also still East Africa at the moment.
And you mentioned you kind of thought you were going to have a career in art. So now you're with Farm from a Box. Just like software has updates 1.0, 2.0, I'm really kind of struck by the evolution of the things you had to learn. And all of a sudden, wait a minute, I went to Berkeley to do art. And now I'm doing the type of people you had to deal with just for your own learning curve to make all this work. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my family they were like, what, you're doing what now? Are you kidding me? So I will say, look, it is so important to follow what it is that you're interested in and that you're passionate about, because there's always going to be days you're like, I don't really want to do this. There's ups and downs and challenges, but lead with that thread of passion. Because I'm coming from a completely different background of art and science, I think the most important thing is to really fill the blind spots that you have and surround yourselves with people that are experts in really diverse ways. One important thing that we have also learned, I think this is so important, is when thinking in terms of expertise, we need to shake that up a little bit. And what actually creates this sort of qualification of being an expert? There's a lot of experts that are indigenous growers that have been doing climate smart agriculture forever. So let's listen to them and make sure that we're pulling their expertise in as well as the technologists. So I think the only way that we've gotten to where we are has been through our complete dedication to partnerships and collaboration, because you can only go so far if you try to do it on your own, and you can go so much farther when you really choose to work with other people.
Talk a little bit about, you talk about going so far, some of the affiliations this journey has taken you on. You've worked with the country of Jordan. You're now working with India. Brandy's the first person I met who actually did a TED Talk. And I really want to know, are they looking at anything? Or do you really just do a TED Talk?
Oh gosh, I was so nervous for the record, but again, sometimes you need to dive into those things. The TED Talk, for the record, which I think applies more so now than it did even when I did the TED Talk, was on how technology and togetherness can help really be able to change the world. And I think that's so apparent now. We can't be in these divided states, because the challenges that are in India, or the challenges that we're seeing in Jordan, or the challenges that we're seeing in Salinas, or the challenges that we're seeing in New York. We have to be able to really work together and make sure that we're developing solutions that benefit everyone. So I think that TED Talk still brings it home. I'm happy that that came to me.
Well, and one of the reasons I bring that up, because, I think it's fair to say there's a little bit of level of complexity of Farm from a Box, the work that needs to be done in the world. Did you deliberately, was it intentional? Because you are a global speaker, you have a following, you're a thought leader, you're an SME. It takes me a while to learn my acronyms. For the longest time, I had no idea what LOL was. Got that one. SME really threw me through a loop, but you're a subject matter expert. Was that intentional to help the business, or did it just come along with it because of the nature of what you were doing?
In terms of doing,
Well, just that type of position as a thought leader, being on the circuit, so to speak. Did they find you because of your work at Farm in a Box, or did you feel that was an important thing to develop in order to promote the business?
I actually think it's a little bit of both. And in my view, the idea of being a thought leader actually just means that you listen, and you listen to a lot of people, and you take in a lot of different perspectives. Otherwise, it's just a very linear approach. So I think in our development over the years, and as you noted, the way that we've evolved our approach, it's really important to get into different networks than you would expect to. Surround yourself with different farmers, surround yourself with different technologists, whatever that so happens to be, because it's going to illuminate the opportunities in the pathway. On one quick note, in terms of the evolution in this room, we'll just let you guys in on a little something exciting that we haven't actually shared publicly, which is, for a long time, we have developed our solution in a shipping container, thinking, great, let's pre-install everything, put it all in one system, put it on a truck, and off we go. It's ruggedized, you can count on it, but we've changed that. During COVID, really seeing the breaks in supply chains, as we all witnessed, our supply chains are fragile. Those are really centralized networks that aren't necessarily building those strong local fabrics. So we decided, wait a minute, we've got a toolkit that can really help strengthen this. So instead of doing one unit at a time, we started looking at how we could interconnect multiple cooperatives all within one solution, so that suddenly they had the volume to be more competitive and really be able to earn more money. So the product has evolved. We're no longer in a shipping container. We're in this really cool eco-modular systems where we can scale up, scale down, but that's been a part of the process of figuring out what's going to be the best solution. How do we optimize for cost? How do we optimize for delivery? How do we optimize for really making sure that the farmers are getting what they need and have a flexible solution to fit that need? So you're kind of constantly changing and really looking at what's needed. And you've got to pay attention to your customer base and what their feedback is in order to make sure you're responding to that.
I'm going to start blending in a little bit of, because some of the students, you asked some of the questions I was going to ask for this. So we're going to go ahead and give you a little ownership in the dialogue. You've talked about the digital side of things. Do you have to keep up with technology moving forward? What's that look like?
I mean, it's a bit like strapping yourself to a rocket ship at this point. As you guys know, technology is changing so rapidly, especially within the arena of AI, as we all know. So I think there's some huge opportunities. We do our best to keep up with it, but it's changing so quickly that I don't know who's able to actually really keep up with it. But I think that there's got to be an openness to really see what can fill the need We always like to say technology for technology's sake is not a solution. It really has to provide value. And I think that, seeing the way that AI is developing, and I've got to compliment all of you, the questions that were submitted were phenomenal. So that really speaks to where your innovative mind is going. AI, I think, holds a lot of promise. It can help enable people to do more with less in that way. It can help provide market guidance. Dennis, you noted I work really closely with Heifer International, who works in 19 countries around the world, all with very small growers. And they're doing a lot of programs around AI where, working with small rural women farmers in Nepal, and how can AI help increase their visibility as farmers to unlock loans, financing, market access, and pooling their data. AI is really able to help give actionable results that they can really make a big difference with. So I think there's a lot of opportunity within the tech space, but it's got to be grounded in what value does it provide.
One of the questions I have, it occurs to me as I'm listening to you, and one of the things we talk about in the ag tech space is, you can have great products, they can work, but if nobody knows how to use them, make them, service them, that's certainly going to slow down adoption. So Farm in a Box shows up, then what happens in terms of who's going to use it? What's the service manual look like? And is it challenging to learn how to use something like that?
I'll give a great example, which is the first farm that we deployed internationally is in Tanzania, and it's in a very remote location on the border of the Congo. So we're facing language barriers. We're facing a community that really has literacy challenges, certainly not in English. And so there was definitely a training divide that needed to happen there. But I think one of the most important things is always have someone, an implementing partner that is working in these communities, that is trusted, it speaks the language, and can help be one of those ongoing training support partners. So we ended up doing that. And while we worked very closely with this implementing partner, this is also where technology can really help. We found that these women farmers that we were working with really took up the trainings very well, and all of them excelled with it, that their production went skyrocketing up. They started training all of their kids. The impact of the project ended up going throughout the entire community. But what we're seeing now that we didn't really have at our access then is that, again, if you look at AI, AI can take an operating manual or instructions and be able to put it into the local language. Whereas previously you have to hire somebody for a heavy cost to go through these translations to make sure that it's readable. And now AI can help expedite that and really be able to help unlock deeper scale too. The second thing that I may mention with that in terms of the technological uptake side is when it comes to maintenance or when things go wrong, because listen, the best laid plans, something can still go wrong. In the case of this particular farm, we were pumping off of a river. And the farmers had sent us this panicked WhatsApp message one day saying the pump stopped working, the pump stopped working. Everyone was in a panic. Somebody's uncle was going to come in from a neighboring village and start dissecting this high-tech pump that we had. And we're like, no, don't touch the pump. From San Francisco, we were able to use our data system to triage what was going on the farm. And in fact, there was nothing wrong with the pump. The water filter needed to be flushed because the river that we were pumping from had a higher level of silt at that particular season. So it became this opportunity to allow us to not have to travel on the expense of going all the way to Tanzania, but help the farmers be able to understand and troubleshoot a little bit more and make sure that their system was still functioning the way that it needed to.
I'm just listening to all of this. So when you say Farm in a Box, so that also presumes there's going to be some products coming out of that. What are they typically? And I imagine that's kind of determined locally, but what's in there normally?
That's a great question. I'm so glad that you asked that, because when people often hear farm from a box and modular solutions, they think that we're growing inside of the box. Did anybody think that? Anyone?
Yes.
It happens all the time, so I wouldn't be surprised. We are not growing inside of the box. We're using the box as sort of this technological hub to support outdoor regenerative crop production. So that means we're crop agnostic. And to your point, on most of the farms that we have, they're growing a very diverse set of fruits, vegetables, sometimes grains. Quinoa has been involved. One of our farms that's actually in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, is also growing a local indigenous tea called chiaca that is a very important medicine plant for the Lakota. So I think it gets very exciting when you aren't limited by the type of crops that you can grow, because it also allows the opportunity for really specialty value add crops where the farmers can earn more money from them.
So does that end up beginning to stimulate other economic activity?
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Because a part of the problem with a lack of infrastructure is that if you're dependent on rain-fed ag and you don't have a lot of infrastructure to be able to have cold storage or drip irrigation, you're just growing what you can grow alongside all of your other small local growers. So suddenly everybody's growing these particular types of onions, these particular types of tomatoes, and they're all flooding the market at the same exact time, which, as we all know, if you get a lot of supply, the price goes down. So that impacts everyone. So a part of the infrastructure is to make sure that we're helping them sort of hedge those bets and grow different types of crops than are currently in the market, extend what that growing season is so they can ultimately earn more too.
It sounds like you're laying out a scenario, this kind of world, what kind of education you need to have? Because you don't necessarily prepare for this.
I don't know how you prepare for this. I think one of the things that you've really got to do is just be really gritty. Like, you've got to have a vision, because let me tell you, when you're working with investors, when you're working with other people, there's always going to be people that tell you, you're crazy. It's not going to work. It's not a good idea. You're going to get a lot of no's along the way. And so I think one of the most important things that you can actually develop, yes, education is incredibly important, but it's not the end all be all. You need to have some heart and you need to have some grit, because I promise you it's going to get tough and things will change and you're going to have to learn and adapt. But I think that's kind of a part of the fun of it is, in entrepreneurship and even certainly if you go in a different direction in business or technology, whatever that looks like, it can be the road less traveled. And at certain points in time, you're like, where am I? Where is everybody on this journey? But then you really have that grit to hold on to why you started what you're doing to begin with. And then you connect with a whole other group of people, and it becomes one of the most rewarding things that you can do. So I would honestly say grit, heart, be bold, press those boundaries. Boundaries are meant to be pressed, and continual walk that edge. That would be one of my biggest learnings.
Okay. Question for you. It may not be fair, but I'm pretty sure you can handle it. I think most of you, we were going to also be joined, and Brandy knows Christine Mosley as well. And unfortunately she had to go back to Florida because of her folks and Hurricane Helena. Traveling in somewhat similar circles from time. Do you have some observations? A lot of talk about sustainability. You mentioned regen in terms of food waste, food insecurity, just some general thoughts that you might want to share about that. And then where I want to go with that is, because one of the things that I think is important to the students is, and climate has come up as well. What are the just kind of comments on that in general? What are the job possibilities that are created with that? How would you look at that if you're sitting out there and go, boy, this all, but how do I make a living?
Yeah.
Or how do I start a company?
And how do you make a good living from it too? I think that's so important. And I want to really give some recognition and some honoring to Christine Mosley, because what she and her team are doing, unfortunately, again, hopefully, please do look her up. They're doing fantastic work. What they're doing in terms of food waste innovation is key, because it's not always about producing more with less, right? That's incredibly important. But it's also, how do we make sure that we are more efficient throughout the entire life cycle, from farm to plate, and what happens thereafter in terms of our health as well. So I think, again, this is where the good spot is with agriculture, is there's so many touch points. And whether that's upstream like we are on the production side, to downstream with consumer solutions, looking at different types of business models, looking at technology, looking at supply chain risk mitigation. That's a huge one for us now. How do you make sure that you're optimizing things from logistics perspective? If you look at anything that's going on in North Carolina, Florida right now, let alone anything internationally, it's still going to come down to logistics. So whatever your natural talents and interests are, I think the biggest opportunity is in breaking down those silos and really paying attention to what's going on across the entire plate. Business model interventions, waste interventions, what's happening in terms of policies, all of it's really important. And when you really sink into it, you're going to learn a lot from each of those too. And there's huge career opportunities in agriculture.
Where does the climate conversation take folks in terms of job possibilities? How broad would you think? I mean, because that can get into soil, that can get into weather,
Yeah.
just any general observations?
And precision agriculture, I heard quite a few things that were already mentioned today. And fresh off the heels of attending Climate Week in New York, it's really changing rapidly. There are different innovative business models that are happening around how do we make sure that we're making investments that provide a financial return, but also have a gender lens to them, because women are also a classically underinvested space within agriculture. So climate plays a huge role. Innovations in from the nature-based solutions to biochar, to different energy solutions. There's a huge and unfortunately growing arena of opportunity within the climate space.
Question, you mentioned investors, and so one of the students asked about a primary focus, shareholders, consumers. You mentioned investors, so how do you do business? Who are you accountable to?
Personally think our most important stakeholder is our users. And quite frankly, our planet. We've got to do well by our users, and we've got to make sure that our solution is making a real change. By doing that, by leading with the value that we provide, we do satisfy the investors, because that makes sure that we're helping continue to grow. If we keep it through these siloed lens of, as a business, we're only paying attention to the investors, we're missing something, because businesses grow through success through your customers and through the value that you provide. So I think that it's really wise in our view to make sure that when you're thinking in terms of stakeholders, you're really growing and developing and making sure that you're providing returns, if you will, to your users, making sure that the growers' livelihoods are being impacted, that the investors are getting a good sizable return for believing in us and making sure that their investment was placed soundly. But also that we're doing well by the planet. That's important now.
Can you talk a little bit about it? And it's interesting. Western Growers, for instance, we've and you'll hear from one of my colleagues is going to be moderating one of the panels, and we've been spending a lot of time on biologicals. We know we're heading to. We always like to call it less chemistry, more biology. We know we're heading to that type of world. But one of the things we run into in the specialty crop world is the length of time for innovation to actually take place. And so we were, in our last summit, we were really addressing that issue. Who's going to finance the future? Because the traditional VCs, they have their objectives. And so patient investing isn't always necessarily front and center, which is fine. People make choices. Can you talk about the difference between social impact investing and then maybe just the kind of the traditional VC model?
Yeah, happy to. And this space is really changing rapidly too. So, when we think of investment, usually we think of venture capital, right? That was certainly my perspective going into this. But it's actually a lot more than that. There's huge investments that are happening. The USDA has been investing heavily in local agriculture, in infrastructure, in supply chain, and food hubs. Huge in terms of really developing different solutions. And I think it's important to also think of, as a growing company, you can go the VC route, which is great for growth. But if you also look at exploring non-dilutive, which means you're not giving portions of your company away when you're really looking to grow and in that research and development phase, it's important to look at those opportunities too. Impact investing is really kind of the investors that are wanting to see how you can not only bring in a good return, but how are you creating a social impact? How are you creating an environmental impact? And oftentimes those are all bundled. Patient capital comes into play a lot with agriculture, because it can take a longer time for agriculturals to grow. It's not a typical sort of software as a service system that you can sort of flip. But even that's changing, because we, as ourselves in Farm from a Box, we have been changing our model too. And so we're also piloting a new financial model for our users that's a hardware as a service model. So subscription-based, again, being able to help sure that we get the infrastructure in the hands of the users in an easier way. One other thing that I want to add, which is philanthropic, impact investing, classic VC, governments, is also in blended finance models. And this is an incredibly growing space where you can use a little bit of all of those things. If you have a large scale idea that basically needs to be de-risked before you can incentivize larger investors to come in, you can use philanthropic capital to say, let's get this infrastructure in place, let's get the project underway to the point where it is economically sustainable on its own and incentivizes larger scale investors that want a classic return to come in at that point too. So I think there's a lot of different really innovative ways to be able to get funding and to be able to grow once you reach that certain lever point too.
A couple more questions as we finish up. I mentioned, well, you've mentioned Tanzania, and then one of the conversations we had a couple years ago, I had to start up in Jordan, and then brushing up on you, now involved with India. Talk a little bit about the world, in terms of how where you've spent some time and where you see a lot of entrepreneurial activity. I routinely tell folks, any given week I'm talking to the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, and I mean this is a global game. But you've hung out in some different neighborhoods.
I've definitely hung out in some different neighborhoods, and I highly encourage people to hang out in different neighborhoods because the learnings are rich and the opportunity to partner with people in a different way is also really rich. We actually started off working in Kenya, and then we worked in Ethiopia for a little while. We engaged in Jordan. Unfortunately, that project did not go through, but we still kept those contacts going, and we ended up taking on more of an advisory role. Gosh, we've worked in Liberia. We've worked in all kinds of different places. And the beauty of this is two things, if I can really kind of nail it with this. One, you see so many different things, different types of growing practices that you weren't aware of here within the US. Different types of solutions for really climate smart agriculture, different types of technological innovations to be able to do things differently. And number two, you see our commonalities. You see that a lot of these farmers, regardless of what their socioeconomic status is or what aspect of climate change they're dealing with or what their education level is, any of that, you still see the commonalities. And that, again, really goes to the importance of agriculture, the importance of breaking down those silos, and we all have blind spots. So the more we look to sort of take our vision from black and white to technicolor, the more we're going to be aware of what we're missing so that we could also approach it a little bit differently and better, and hopefully be able to team up and do good things together.
Okay. All right. Now the big finish. So what's the future hold for you, for you and Farm in the Box?
Oh, bringing it home on this one.
Yeah.
On my advice of go bigger, go bolder, that's what we continually lean into. And it can be frustrating sometimes. We want progress to happen at a much faster rate than it happens, but you just got to keep going. And sometimes there's a lot of wisdom in those moments of not getting what you want fast enough because you change things. So one of the big things for us has been innovating around this product, making sure that we're launching our next gen project, which is this super cool eco-modular thing that this is our first public announcement of it. So here you go, guys. Like, this is the exciting part. And secondly, really like looking at how we address this value chain solution, because there's only so far we can do one farm at a time, but collectively connecting one farm with another farm with another farm, that's where we change a city, we change a country, we change the world. And so that's where we're going, is really how can we continue to work with different farm cooperatives to bring in the best of technology, pair that together with regenerative climate smart agriculture, and really help uplift small local growers globally.
Well, Brandy, we worked very hard. We have two great panels coming, but we worked very hard to make sure they had a hard act to follow. And Brandy, I think you did that, so please join me in thanking Brandy.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Very good. And she will be flying back home, not swimming. Nick Cascio, who is going to lead a panel on sustainability in ag. It's all yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dennis, for the introduction. Brandy, it is going to be a hard act to follow. Everything that you said truly resonated with me. And one of the common themes that I heard throughout, I did hear local, 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 but I also heard thinking outside of the box for Farm in a Box. And you really had to think outside the box to get to where you are at today. So thank you. Welcome, everybody, to this panel discussion. As Dennis said, this panel is all focused on sustainability in agriculture. My name is Nikki Cosillo. I am the CEO and founder of Measure to Improve, which is a sustainability consulting firm committed to helping the produce industry collect, report, and communicate all the things that they're doing in and around sustainability. I have the pleasure and honor of being today's moderator. As a moderator, I not only have the opportunity to introduce these two CSU MB alumni, but I've also been asked to provide a very high-level overview of what does sustainability mean, what's driving this, and provide a few examples of what this produce industry is doing in and around sustainability. So over the next 25 minutes, you will hear from two CSUMB alumni. They will walk you through their experience and provide inspiration from their wealth of knowledge in and around sustainability. So rather than go into lengthy introductions, I want to allow both Katie Chiapuzzi, and Wyatt Macy to take a moment to introduce themselves and their companies before we get right into it.
I'm Katie Trapuzio. I am the Director of Environmental Science and Resources for Braga Fresh, and I graduated from Cal State Monterey in 2017 with a degree in Environmental Science, Technology, and Policy.
I'm Wyatt Macy. I graduated from CCMB in 2015 with a degree from the business program. I also played on the men's soccer team, which was a fun experience. I currently serve as the Director of Sustainability at Taylor Farms. We're a large salad company, if you will, and focus on managing the environmental social impact for the company as a whole.
So before we dive into it, I have a few slides that I wanted to bring up. This is really to level set, get us all on the same page. We all define sustainability a little bit differently. No matter who I'm talking to, whether it's a new client or a speaking engagement, this is always a slide that I bring. So when we talk about sustainability, it's about the triple bottom line or the 3 Ps. When we talk about people, it's about fair labor practices. It's about investing in your community in which we live and work. It's about education and training. It's about worker health and safety. When we talk about the planet, we talk about resource use efficiency. When we talk about resources, we're talking about efficient use of our water, efficient use of our energy, minimizing our waste, the impact on the environment. It also can mean greenhouse gas emissions. We're also talking about sustainable packaging, healthy soils initiatives. When we talk about profit, it's not about how much money a company makes. It's about planning for the long term. It's about succession planning, investing in new technology to improve your efficiencies. To truly define something as sustainable, you must include all 3 of these Ps, the people, the planet, and the profit. Oftentimes, when I show growers, shippers, or our new clients this, it's the aha moment. Like, we've been doing this our whole life. It makes a good business case that translates into environmental social benefits. So this is what we mean by sustainability. So what's driving this for the produce industry? Again, I have a few examples here. It's the regulatory requirements. Greenhouse gas emissions are the leading cause to climate change, and large corporations are now being asked to collect and report their greenhouse gas emissions in an effort to find opportunities to mitigate climate change. When we talk about regulatory requirements, another great example is extended producer responsibility, EPR. Single-use plastic is getting a lot of attention because it's a major contributor to environmental pollution. But at the same time, it also serves a very valuable purpose in keeping our food safe and extending shelf life. Another example of what's driving this is increasing consumer demands. And there's no surprise with all the information that we're seeing on the news and in social media, consumers are becoming more aware of environmental issues. Consumers want to support brands that demonstrate their environmental and social responsibilities. And consumers are demanding transparency from companies about where their product comes from and how it's made. Finally, this is the big driver, at least for our suppliers that are coming to Measure to Improve. Buyers are responding to the customer requests. So in response to that, they're sending these produce suppliers requests for information around their waste, their water, their energy. And that's really the three main drivers that are driving sustainability in the produce industry. Finally, just some examples of how produce industry can address sustainability. Sustainability strategy. It has to become part of your business strategy moving forward. This is not a nice to have. This is becoming the cost of doing business. Our suppliers in the produce industry are also addressing buyer surveys and reporting demands. They're also addressing specific topics. These are ranging from greenhouse gas emissions, sustainable packaging, food loss and waste, regenerative agriculture, healthy soil initiatives, and zero waste. And finally, they're asking for the industry to provide some sort of validation and proof, and that's through third-party certifications that says they're doing exactly what they say they're doing because they've had these third-party audits. Now, after having provided some context on the meaning of sustainability and some examples of the efforts the produce industry is making to participate in this space, I'd like to begin the conversation with two sustainability experts who are both living and breathing and tasked with leading the efforts for their own organizations. So I'd like to start it off with Katie. As a graduate of CSUMB, can you walk us through your career path that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, so to play off of Brandy's talk earlier, it was nonlinear, very much nonlinear. I did not really know what I wanted to get into when I was in school. So I got a degree in environmental science because I like to be outside and I really enjoyed science. When I was at CSUMB, I was working two jobs. I was working for two local nonprofits. So I was at Everyone's Harvest, hosting and managing farmers markets in Marina and Pacific Grove. And then I was also working for what is now the Habitat Stewardship Project. So doing a whole lot of environmental education. I really, really enjoyed that. But I felt that I needed to kind of skill build coming out of college. And so what I did is I went on Craigslist like any normal person, and I looked for random jobs that could help me build my skills. And so something I was super interested in was apiculture. If you're familiar, it's beekeeping. And so I got a job doing kind of environmental education with a mix of beekeeping. I didn't know anything about it, but I really wanted to learn it. It was a cool job, but I needed to make a little bit of money too, because I needed to pay rent. And so not super high paying. And so what I did from there is I saw that Braga actually had an opportunity for a contractor to do data analysis on their greenhouse gas emissions. And I said, okay, I'm working my body a lot. I need to start working my brain again a little bit. And so took that opportunity, and it eventually grew into this 5+ year career path of learning sustainability, doing all of the compliance, all of the buyer surveys, all of the field trials, anything that Braga does under the umbrella of sustainability, I manage.
Great. And Wyatt, can you walk us through your career path that led you where you're here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I always wanted to be in food in some way, shape, or form, own a restaurant, be a chef, whatever. As I matured, I realization of where that could be and how I could get there. I know the foundation is business. And so I really wanted to understand the major principles of what it means to be in business, finance, marketing, et cetera, knowing that I still wanted to get involved in food. I then drifted plans, wanted to go work for Chipotle, actually. So I went and worked at a Chipotle because I heard it was good to go work on the floor of a store, understand the system that you're getting involved in. Applied for an internship, didn't get it. And I was very, very fortunate enough to work with Nikki, who gave me an internship with Measure to Improve. And I was like, okay, I'll do this for a year. I'll go work for Chipotle after this. Ended up loving it and getting deeply, deeply involved in it. and really understanding the system of agriculture and the specialty crops specifically. So that I did that for multiple years, 5 years, then transitioned into Taylor Farms, which was also a client of ours. So I'm still have imposter syndrome, but I have currently serve as the director of sustainability today. And then like Katie said, deal with all of the actual compliance versus reporting versus actual project implementation, could be solar, could be zero waste program, et cetera. But overall, the mission is how do we lower environmental impact and social impact of the company.
Excellent. For those of you that are out there listening, internships are a great way to explore your career choice. And as you've seen, Wyatt is now the director of Taylor Farms, and he started as an intern. So congratulations both to Katie and Wyatt on your career. So Wyatt, what are some of the skills you recommend for someone that might be considering a career in sustainable agriculture?
Yeah, I think echoing off of what you heard earlier from Brandy, for me, probably the biggest recommendation is understand the system that you're going into. So for me, it's two parts: the sustainability, what that is, versus specialty crop production in agriculture. And so really going down a lot of rabbit holes of what that means. And it wasn't from the classroom. Learned a lot of business principles from the classroom, but learning specialty crop production was literally just hours of rabbit hole on Google. And as well as sustainability, really understanding what's setting the foundation in agriculture. How did it start? How did it break off into different industries such as forestry versus specialty crops versus major row crops like corn and soy versus sustainability? What does that mean? Who are the associations that are driving that, like the Global Reporting Initiative or SASB, which they have now combined into IFRS. There are multiple, figuring out who are the biggest players in the space, what can you learn from them, what's the innovative and new technology coming out of those industries, but also where did they start? So really understanding the system that exists and so that you know where you're going to sit in that, and that you can have conversations with a shipper versus a technology provider versus a packaging provider, because you know the full system that you're going to be working in. So that would be kind of my recommendation. It's, again, you can learn the foundation principles from school, but really take the deep dive. Let your curiosity really lead you and your passion, and just let it drive you. And again, go down many different rabbit holes. You think it may be a waste of time, eventually it will work out and pay off dividends.
And one more question before I move on to Katie. Any classes, Wyatt, or topics you wish you would have focused on in school that you hadn't realized would have been useful today?
Yeah, well, when I was at CSUMB, there was no soil science. Probably would have been ideal a lot in that space as well. So that would have been a recommendation. I would also say, I think there's an avenue that eventually you may have to choose. And, you know, this is just my personal opinion, but there's a difference between a subject matter expert and those who bring together those subject matter experts. I am not an expert in anything particular subject of, say, packaging, soil science, climate, and energy. I know I can have those conversations and still be knowledgeable in that subject, but my mission is to bring together those subject matter experts to help build the strategy and impact that I see for the company. So it's kind of, you in my opinion, you kind of have to make a choice of, do you want to be the managing position of that and learn how to really work with the subject matter experts, or do you want to be that subject matter expert? I think is an important choice down a career path.
So Katie, from the farming perspective, what are some of the skills you recommend for someone that might consider a career in sustainable agriculture or production? Yeah.
I fully have to agree with Wyatt. It's not really about being the expert. We do have a lot of experts in this room who are absolute experts in their field, but if you can talk to an academic and you can talk to a farmer and you can get them into the same room and have them talk to each other, that is a success. And that's how I've seen most of my successes and our business successes, right? So you have all of these people who have very, very different knowledge bases, but we all need to start speaking the same language so that we can actually get things done, right? Because I can't get my sustainability efforts accomplished without my farmers being on board. And so if I can't talk to them respectfully, understand where they're coming from, and really just get to know that system, then I'm really not going to be effective. And so I think really just knowing a little bit about everything is really helpful. I had no agricultural background. Literally the closest I got to ag was living around it. And then also just managing farmers markets. So really, really small scale stuff. And so coming into the system, I did a lot of what Wyatt did. I was like, I need to stay busy for 8.5 hours today. So I'm going to do a lot of Googling. I'm going to get in my truck and I'm going to drive a lot of fields and I'm going to see what's going on and I'm going to try to make sense of it. And when I clearly don't understand it, I'm going to go ask that person who does, and they're going to explain it to me and I'm going to listen. And so really communication, willingness to teach yourself. And if you're not interested in an industry of continuous learning, then this is probably not going to be the industry for you.
Any classes or topics you wish you would have focused on in school that you hadn't realized would be useful now?
Yeah, there was no plant physiology. That would have been really helpful. Soil science also would have been really helpful. I chose to take all the classes where I got to go camping and do all that stuff. Valuable, but maybe not in my current career. So.
You know, and again, this theme resonates with what you said, Randy. It's that it takes a lot of heart and grit, and you've got to learn to adopt. And both of you have set examples or shared those examples of forcing yourself to really learn about something that you truly love. Excellent. Now, what are some up and coming positions specific to sustainable ag that you can think of? And why don't you start us off, Katie?
Okay, I would say this is a weird one, but I'm told to pitch it every time I have any sort of audience. There is insect rearing is a great demand in agriculture, and it is not going well so far. So a lot of our insect providers are going out of business, or they're rearing insects and there's not a whole lot of success. So I have been told by people who are trying to fly drones and drop bugs that we need higher quality bugs. So if you like bugs and you want to rear them, I think that's a great career path for you.
Can you speak to a little bit about why these bugs are so important?
Yeah. So the company that told me that I really need to pitch that to anybody, so they drone drop beneficial insects over fields to raise the population so that those beneficial insects will then predate the pest insect, right? And in organic farming especially, it's an absolute necessary service, right? We need beneficial insects. We don't have a lot of chemicals and things out there that are working in organic systems to control pests. So if we can get like super bugs, yeah, that would be really, really helpful for the industry.
Yeah, I would say it's vast. You're looking at a lot of robotics, mechanics, innovation and technology there. Labor shortages are a serious problem within agriculture. Surprising, you don't want to go work in a field as much anymore. So a lot of automation around robotics, mechanics. That's why Taylor Farms was a funding partner of the new building here at CCMB, as well as digitization, data science. I would say agriculture is specifically an industry that has been left behind a little bit in terms of technological updates. And so a huge challenge for us will be digitization of data in the field and in our facilities, and then as well as how to analyze that data and make it useful to our operations. So it's going to go in a variety of different ways, but those would probably be the two more pressing ones I would say.
I'd like to add something to that. I think communication is really important. Being able to translate some of the very, very technical aspects of sustainability and technology into something that consumers can relate and appreciate what this industry is doing. So communication is very, very important. So if you're a good writer, that's going to be a useful talent. So I'd like to turn it over to the audience, has presented some questions. I know we touched on AI. I know we touched on technology. So I'm going to shift a little bit. And this question comes from Isaac Iselis. Thank you, Isaac. How is your company adopting its business strategies to address the increasing impacts of climate change on agriculture? And what innovations are being implemented to promote sustainable farming practices?
So I strategically manage my time so that most of it is actually spent in the field. And so I'm going to answer kind of from the actual farming perspective for this question. One of the things that Braga is doing is trying our hand at regenerative agriculture. And that definition is still up for debate. CDFA is working on it. IFPA is working on it. Wyatt and I are working on it. Everyone's working on it. But what we're doing is we're trying to change our farming practices, because in order to stay relevant in agriculture, we feel that there's a lot of business strategy around that, but we really need to be able to continue to produce a crop. And that is the most immediate risk that climate change is presenting to us. And so we're trying all sorts of weird intercropping and reducing our tillage and anything that we can do that any researcher like Eric comes and tells us to do, we try to do it. We collaborate with as many universities as possible, and just we're transparent about the entire process. So we have field days and we're talking to other growers, and our goal is really what can we do in our system to reduce our impact so that we can continue to stay relevant, and then make our business decisions around that. And hopefully we can get to the point where we actually get more shelf space with regenerative or more sustainable products. We can start to get a certification, and we can really start pushing that envelope, because really well developed as the agricultural system is, there's a lot of places for improvement, and we're trying to identify those and actually make that improvement. So if anybody has any good ideas, give us a call.
Great. The next question is for you, Wyatt. How is your organization addressing sustainability challenges in agriculture, and what innovation or innovative practices are you implementing?
So similar to Katie, we're both growing operation and facility-based operations, so we're pretty well vertically integrated. Sustainability is mostly about inputs and outputs. So how efficient are you being with those inputs? I don't think there'll be a day where we are dry farming necessarily. So how efficient can you be with your water or chemical use, pesticide use, et cetera, lessen that. So it's all about inputs, outputs. I think that's where we strive for every day. I'm very data centric. So my mission after taking the director role for the past 2 years has been data, data, data. How do we get those communication channels flowing so that we can make better decisions, more informed decisions? For the past couple of years, we've been working heavily on data and digitization of our operations so that we can take that to the next level of actual projects that can go in the ground that have actual impact. And we can assess those projects based on risk and impact, both economic and social environmental. For us, it's been a lot of data. And then our next phase will be moving into more of full-blown project implementation, which we already do today, but not to the extent that we could, and figure out where's the prioritization, if it's climate, if it's water, if it's both, what projects will again lead to that greater impact. A lot of it's been data.
Let's see, we've got a lot of great questions here. This could be for either one of you. What are the biggest challenges currently facing the agriculture sector, and how can we address them?
Really, one huge challenge that we're seeing every day is a labor shortage. And I think that one cool way that we're seeing that being addressed is through ag tech. So some of our coolest things that I like to see and I like to show people when they're on farm are just like deep machine AI learning, whether it be an amendment or like a fully, self-driving tractor or something like that. All of these big tech implements are really helping us with our labor shortage. So for example, if you've ever seen a carbon robotics laser weeder, it's literally a weeder that shoots laser beams at plants, which is super cool. And it took away the need for like 40 to 60 hand weeding crews, which we didn't have anymore. So it wasn't that we were taking those jobs, it's that those jobs did not exist anymore. Those people were not there. They were being put into higher paid positions, doing less, physical labor. And so that shortage is continuing, and we are really looking for any sort of machine learning solutions or any other solution that people can offer to labor shortage for us.
I'll say a second, and to me, that's the aging workforce. I think there may be a shift, hopefully, I'm being optimistic, but the shift of where the labor force is today in agriculture, the growers that you meet today are generally going to be on the older age side. I think Katie and I will probably be the youngest panel you'll ever see, and specifically talking to agriculture in this space. But I would say we need more youth coming through the pipelines, talking about agriculture, how food gets to the table. Be intrigued by it, be curious, and be proud to work in agriculture, because you should be. If your parents work in agriculture, be proud as well and thank them. It's a serious space that we need more innovation in, and so that's also why we need more youth, is to bring that innovation.
So in closing, what are some of your recommendations for this audience to take away if they're interested in pursuing a career in agriculture? It doesn't have to be around sustainability.
Brandy said it, and I'm going to hit home on it too, because that's what I look for when I'm hiring. It's passion. Really, where are you passionate about? If you're passionate about ag, what's your second passion? How can you integrate that into your work? I'm passionate about environmental social impact. I just happen to be in the ag space. I was passionate about food, and I brought those two together. So that's why I do what I do today. And it really carries you on. It builds on the day-to-day challenges where you come into work not so motivated. It builds on the challenges of if you're not as experienced or knowledgeable in a subject, you dig into it and you dive into that. I've spent, again, hours going down those rabbit holes of subject matter I did not understand. So really passion, and then figure out how to connect those two on a career level.
I think also there's just a level of resource around us that we might not recognize. For me, like, it's talking to my coworkers, like I said, who know what they're doing and really know their kind of portion of agriculture. So whether that be implements or PCAs or whoever they are, get in their truck and learn from them, right? Talk to your parents if they're in the industry. There's something to learn there too, and try to understand just as much as possible about it. Don't feel bad if you're not an expert in anything, because as long as you can stay in the room and be relevant, I think you'll be okay.
Great. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much.
Well done, Nikki and Cast. And with that, I am pleased to introduce one of my favorite colleagues, Dr. Gina Cadby, and she's going to bring up a group, and they're going to talk about climate smart ag. So please welcome them.
While everyone's getting settled, I just want to give a big thank you to Dennis. So you guys don't know this, but Dennis is the director of our Center for Innovation and Technology in Salinas. He's one of our, like, when we talk about Salinas, he's like, he is Salinas, he embodies it. So look him up. He's awesome. He's done a lot of great work. We have a lot of startup companies that come through our CIT. So if we could just get just a quick round of applause for Dennis for being an awesome MC. Thank you. So thank you so much for having us. My name is Gina Cadby. I am the Environment and Climate Director for Western Growers. And so what that means is I really work with farmers under the umbrella of sustainability. So a big chunk of my job is, for example, working with researchers on how to translate that cutting edge research over to farmers, and working with farmers on how do we then give researchers, give regulatory folks, give people an idea of what is actually needed, what's practical on the farm, what can be utilized. So we have a really, really, really awesome panel today. I'm super excited to have you guys. These are folks who are very successful in their careers, very established, and have done a lot for the ag industry. So thank you guys so much for coming. A little bit about me, I guess we were asked to share about our journey of how we got here. So I was super interested in sustainable agriculture, agroecology really is I think what it was referred to is. So I did have a undergraduate and a master's degree in plant and soil sciences. So really I just wanted to eat fruit is what it came down to, but this was the fastest track to do that. So after I graduated in that, I ended up getting my PhD in international sustainable agricultural development studies. So I specifically focused on craft chocolate and specialty cacao, which looking at, how smallholder farmers can benefit from the system. And what that meant was I spent a lot of time talking to farmers, working with farmers on the farm, and also eating a lot of chocolate for science. Like it had to be for research, obviously. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And I'm really just grateful for that experience today. I got here I have worked for a startup company doing sustainable inputs with biological products. And now I'm here at Western Growers. So super excited to have our panel. I'm going to actually ask you guys a question and ask you to introduce yourselves. I'm going to start with Jeff. So Jeff has actually had a really, really exciting and interesting and very successful career before he got to the role he even is in today. So can you talk a little bit about how you got here, what your company does, and who you are?
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm Jeff Anderson. I'm the CEO of All Made Materials. We are a material science company. We're a VC-backed startup. We're located here in Monterey. We're over by the airport. What we do is we convert almond shells, which are widely abundant throughout California, into plastic alternative composites. So basically composites that would replace polypropylene or high-density polyethylene. So go into everything from flower pots to agricultural bins and everything in between, packaging, all kinds of different things. My background is actually, I've had a very strange background. It's kind of meandered all over the place. But for the last 15 years, I've been really focused on how do you utilize deep technology to convert what other people would say are waste streams into something that's of value.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to go next to Steve. So Steve, you're in the wine industry, which has historically been kind of on the leading edge in terms of sustainability. You're also in biochar. How many of you guys know what biochar is? Right? Okay. So for those who don't know what biochar is, could you maybe also let us know what is biochar and a little bit about your organization?
Sure. Thank you. I grew up on a farm, citrus and avocados in Southern California. I swear I didn't want anything to do with it, being raised on a farm and working out in the fields. So I became a music major without any talent. And so, long story short, I eventually found my way back to agriculture once it's in your roots, and got a master's degree in enology from Fresno State and also viticulture. I liked college, so I got both degrees, which I highly recommend. So 32 years in business here in Monterey County, 42 years farming in this agricultural sanctuary. We got a marine sanctuary. We also have an agricultural sanctuary, 250,000 irrigated acres, some of which has been declared sustainable by Department of Water Resources in terms of its water supply. So it's an amazing place, and really glad to see this many potential students and workforce for our industry. A little bit about biochar. So biochar can be made from many different substrates. We're using a wood product over this way, Regen Monterey. We're actually setting up to use almond shells. And instead of incinerating this waste, we're pyrolyzing this waste. So we make biochar made at a lower temperature than incineration. It's about 700, 800 degrees Celsius, which carbonizes the carbon and in the substrate so that you don't lose it to the atmosphere. So you're basically removing carbon from its potential getting up in the atmosphere, because everything, wood waste, of course, decomposes and then it does end up in the atmosphere. We're taking that product and we're sequestering in the soil in permanent crops. And so for every 3 tons of wood waste, we're getting a ton of biochar, which has a CDR, carbon dioxide removal equivalent of 2.6 tons of atmospheric carbon for 3 tons of waste. And that's determined through a life cycle assessment. So that's the basics.
Thank you so much. All right. So last but not least, we also have Eric. Tell us a little bit about your role. You are also local. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, nice to see everybody here. So my name is Eric Brennan. I like to say I work for all of you because I'm a public servant scientist. So I work at the United States Department of Agriculture, the Agriculture Research Service. So the USDA is a big group. Some people stamp meat. You've probably seen that little label. I'm not that side. I do the research side of the agency. My undergraduate's from the University of Hawaii. I grew up in the tropics. I grew up in Papua New Guinea. So I would say that's where my research career began, really. I was had very open-minded parents. And when I was 4 or 5 years old, in my bedroom in Papua New Guinea, I would actually take manure from our milking cow, mix it in bottles and bring it into my bedroom and water plants. And that's kind of where I started my interest in agriculture. Many years later, moved to the US. We settled in Hawaii. I did my undergraduate there. Then I did a master's. Actually, I was a Peace Corps volunteer after that in Thailand for many years, where I got a lot of hands-on experience, working with small-scale farmers, learning to communicate with them. Came back to the US and did a master's and a PhD. Then I got this wonderful job at the USDA working in organic agricultural research. So I love my job, and I hope that each of you can find a job in agriculture that you love as much as what I do, because it's so fulfilling to be able to work in something that you're passionate about.
We're going to stay on Eric for a moment. So when you say that you're in research, that's a really broad term, right? So can you paint a little bit of picture of what does that mean when someone says, oh, I'm in research? And you kind of picture maybe a lot of people looking at microscopes inside a lot, but I believe you spend a lot of time outside. So can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, last week I spent a lot of time getting dehydrated in the field, so it's not quite as glorified as I love microscopes, I love plant anatomy, but most of my work is in the field. So I run field scale, often commercial scale production experiments. So one of our studies, a lot of my research is on cover crops, which are crops that we grow when we're not growing our cash crops. So these are crops that we turn back into the soil. Do a lot of research on that. That involves everything from, planting the cover crops to irrigating them, to collecting biomass samples, determining the growth stage of the plants, doing analysis on the carbon and nitrogen in them, trying to understand the budgets of carbon and nitrogen that we're putting into the soil, and also our outputs from those systems. And then ultimately taking that information and publishing it in peer-reviewed scientific journals. That's what I'm paid to do. But there's another part of it, and that's actually trying to get the information out to farmers. The USDA wants us to do that, but we're not always, that's not really where we get our big bonuses from, but that's what I am very passionate about as well. So I use YouTube to try to get my information out to farmers, and it's a great way to do that. And so science communication is a big part of my job.
We couldn't have a panel without plugging a YouTube channel. What is it called?
I'm not sure what the channel is called, but if you just look up USDA Brennan Organic, and you will find my channel.
Awesome. We have a celebrity amongst us. Okay. So Jeff, actually, can you talk a little bit about, so your product basically takes a waste product and makes it into something new. And this isn't necessarily a new thing, but can you talk a little bit about why that's important today, why we need that kind of technology today, and also a little bit about how you got into that, because that's also really interesting.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's incredibly important because in California, we have a lot of almond shells, right? Like there's a huge amount of supply. I would say the traditional demand for what they typically go into is dwindling. And so the industry needs to find new sources. And I think that this is, if I were starting my career right now, especially here in Monterey Bay, I would look at opportunities in ag, and I think that you're just awash in opportunity. If you just look around at all of the different byproduct streams and waste streams that come off of this incredibly productive economy, you can find new uses for these different products. And you can take off-the-shelf technologies and say, okay, how do I apply this to this undervalued stream of compounds and make something much, much more valuable from that? That's exactly what we're doing, which is we're displacing plastics, which I think people would universally say are bad in terms of their impact on the environment and human and planetary health, but they're incredibly functional and they're really cheap. And so it's very difficult to displace them with really expensive, highfalutin new molecules. So you have to consider cost. And so if you can take something that's free or almost free and displace something that's relatively more expensive, you can create economic value. And you can displace something that everybody kind of wants to get rid of anyway. And so I think from a societal point of view, a reduction in the amount of plastics has value. To our customers, like one of the things that's so interesting is that there's within the sustainability movement, there's a lot of movement on CO2 reduction in all the different categories, but where everyone seems to have a stumbling block is how do you get rid of plastic? It's really hard, right? And packaging is really important. If you can remember, 15 years ago when Apple really started innovating around its packaging, that had a tangible benefit to consumers. And so actually that's literally where your product touches the consumer, is the packaging in which that you buy it from. And so helping these brands and helping these companies to replace something that consumers don't want with something that is much more benign, I think has value.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So Steve, similarly, you're in an industry where biochar has been around for a long time, but it's not necessarily status quo. So why is it important, the work that you're doing, and why is it important that we talk about these types of solutions?
Well, that's a really good question, Gina. I think that there's lots of things to be concerned about in the world today. And specifically with agriculture, we could all die on that Roundup sword if we want to, right? There's lots of pesticides and things that are not good for the environment. However, I would suppose that it's the climate sword that's going to get us first or last. And that's why for us, it's really important to be thinking about carbon neutrality. And so that's our goal. We feel that is the most existential threat to agriculture. We've got to slow down global warming. And so that's why we went to the direction that we did with biochar.
You guys are established in your careers. You're all very successful. You've done really great things for the ag industry. So we'll start with Eric and move this way. What is something that you would really like to see happen in your lifetime? What is a success that you are like, if I could just have this one thing happen, man, I would feel like I made it. I did the thing.
I wish I was last. I think I have one thing that would be a good answer to that question. So I've been working on cover crops since 2001 when I started working in Monterey County, Salinas Valley. At that time, there wasn't much interest in them. Now there is a huge amount of interest in them. They can transform our systems, both by increasing the flow of carbon into the soil and by reducing the flow of nitrogen from our soil into the water that we drink. So if my research can help farmers to get a credit for good practices like that, and that will help us address, soil quality problems, disease issues, nutrient pollution into our groundwater, that would be a huge benefit to the area and make me feel like all the time I've spent sweating under these cover crops collecting data has been worth it, because farmers want to do good things. They really do, regardless of whether or not they're conventional or organic farmers. And sustainability is far bigger than just one or the other. There's good and, sustainable and unsustainable on both sides. But important practices like cover cropping, I think, have to be part of that. And I think if we can incentivize those good practices with, certain things like there's some new regulations that can really help farmers move and get nudged in the right direction. So I want my research to be able to help with that difficult transition, really.
So I would say, just kind of more broadly, I think one of the things that I'd be really excited to see in my lifetime is nitrogen fixation. So there's been a lot of research that's gone into that from different VC-backed companies and in the public, which is like, how do you mimic the fixation, like in soybeans or legumes, fixing atmospheric nitrogen into the soil? I mean, the impact, it sounds super boring when you say it. The impact is you get rid of most of fertilizer, right? And so the consequences of that environmentally are it's staggering.
Well, there's a book that I read, and it's called Burn, B-U-R-N, and just the foreword and the first chapter will tell you everything you need to know about biochar. And you can get it on Audible for like $4, so it's a good listen. I have a broad ambition here that in the future you can go to your restoration hardware catalog online or some front gate and buy a home biochar unit, so that the plastics that get replaced by waste or almond shells or anything like that, the packaging materials that is that get replaced by these things, you take your trash out to your biochar unit and you put it in there, and once a week you start the thing. And oh, by the way, it gives off heat. So it could also be a pizza cooker. But more likely, it'll use a Rankine cycle to generate electricity that goes in your microgrid. And now you're not delivering waste to a landfill. You're dealing with it at home on your own time and scale, and you're making a product that takes the carbon out of the atmosphere or prevents carbon from going into the atmosphere. So the home biochar unit pizza cooker would be my contribution.
That sounds great. I would buy that. So when we talk about climate change, I think there are a couple of keywords that come up a lot, soil health, climate resilience. Can you talk a little bit about what are the keywords in your industry? We can start with Eric, or we could go this way and give you the last one if you want. Last or Steve. Okay. Give Eric a little break. So, what are the keywords that come up for you and why are they important to you?
Soil microbiome comes up for me when 40 some odd years ago when I was at the university, in a soil class, that we had, we talked about chemical structure. We talked about physical structure. Nobody noticed anything about the microbiome or microbiome, activity in the soils. And, what Eric was talking about with cover crops, I mean, if, we're fortunate, we're a permanent crop, we can go with permanent cover crops. We don't liberate methane. Tillage liberates methane. Tillage liberates a lot of different carbon into the atmosphere, and we need to get past that. Braga's doing some really great stuff, Eric Morgan, right, on looking at cover crops in farming systems for row crops. That's the thing, the microbiome, and we actually believe now it's hypotheses, correlation, and cause and effect. Well, there's correlation between the soil microbiome and wine quality, which could explain why the folks who tell you that a biodynamic wine is better than a regular conventional wine could explain why. They can't now, but they could in the future.
The big words in my industry, which I would consider to be the plastics industry, is circularity. The industry is very aggressively trying to find solutions that make use of the plentiful and really incredible infrastructure of plastic manufacturing that exists today. But how do you actually make materials that don't harm the planet from that infrastructure? So that become fully circular.
Another big word I think is soil carbon sequestration. So trying to take carbon dioxide we're all breathing out of our mouth every day, every minute, till we aren't, and trying to get it to go back into the soil. That's a hard thing to do, and often we focus on the amount that we're putting back in. But I think there's a really good paper I read. I've reread it quite often. It's written by this soil scientist, Henry Jansen. And he talks about, rather than focus on the amount of carbon in the soil, focus on the flow of carbon to the soil. So are you focused on putting carbon back in? Then generally you're going to be doing the right thing. If we focus on just how much is in the soil, it's quite hard to detect that in a short amount of time. A few years, you often can't see it. It takes a long time. But if you focus on the flow, you're doing the right thing. You'll see benefits sooner than the soil will show in terms of carbon, soil organic matter changes. So just focus on that flow rather than so much how much carbon does the soil have.
All right, so we're in the Q&A portion of the panel. This is wrapping it up here. So we have a couple of questions that were submitted to us. One from Nahoa Davis. This will go to Jeff. How do you maintain balance between innovation and managing risks in your organization?
So I spent the last 2 decades in deep tech startups, so that's pretty hard on the risk and innovation side. I would say we're not really balanced. It's very heavy on risk and on innovation, but that's the invest that the investors put in, right? So if you're looking for a 1x return, or 2x return, there's a very different investment that you would make. But that said, even within relatively risky organizations, you want to stage gate the risk and try to identify milestones. And you would design it just basically the path, just like you would design any kind of series of experiments in science. So you're going to have an experiment and you want to, like, coming out of it, you need to understand something. And when you're doing it wrong, you make an investment, something happens, and you don't actually learn. Because the path to finding product market fit, the path to finding the route for the company really involves, it's a lot of twists and turns. And at each twist and turn, it's really important to learn.
Thanks, Jeff. So this is a question for Eric. So you're like me, we did a lot of school, for better or for worse, we did a lot of it. This is a question for Gurtaj. What key skills do you believe are essential for future leaders in business, and how can students best develop these skills while still in school?
I'd say one of the most important ones is to know how to communicate, whatever you're focused on. I didn't ever take a speech class or a science communication class or anything like that. I had to learn it as I went along, and I'm still learning it. I still make mistakes. So learning how to communicate, how to connect with people, I think is so critical. It doesn't matter if you're in a country where you don't speak their language or if you're in a country where you do. If you can connect with somebody in a very human way, that matters. I remember when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand and I was traveling on a bus, and I'd been there maybe a week or so. And a farmer sitting next to me said, "What do you do?" Well, I thought that's what I was asked. And I said, "I'm a farmer." He took my hand and he looked at my hand and he rubbed his fingers across my calluses and looked at me and said, "I'm not quite sure," but we connected. Farmer was the closest thing I knew what to say, but I wasn't a farmer. I was actually a farm advisor, an extension person who was trying to work with farmers. But people will see through your mistakes. But if you can connect with them, they will be gracious with you, and they will give you some room.
Thank you. Okay, so Steve, this is a question from Francisco. What do you believe is the most important quality for a leader to have in today's business environment, and why?
I would say hire people that are smarter than you are, and to learn how to, building on what Eric said, establish relationships that are meaningful. I also think it's really powerful right now for leaders to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is a very powerful ability and trait and characteristic that would serve you really, really well moving forward in any career.
Thanks, guys. Last question here, and it's really free form. So I want to give you guys each a minute or two to really just, if you have something that's just a burning thing you really want to share, whether it be a YouTube channel or whatever it is, I just want to give you guys a minute to just share whatever that is. We can start with Jeff, and then maybe you guys can decide who goes next.
I can just give some advice, because I think if I remember when I was in college and I was looking at, everyone used to ask, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And it was like, man, this is like mounting pressure. I don't know what I want to do. And the only thing that I found, especially in my career, because I bounced around into very different fields and did some really hard pivots, it was that if you're in a place where you're just not interested, you're not passionate about that, right? If you're just not interested. And so I would say, as you start your career, try to find things, at least find things that you're not interested in, right? So if nothing else, it's a very low bar. The other one is, you're graduating into a very different environment than what I did. And I think it's really important. When I was coming out of college, the internet was becoming a big thing. Like my first employer, they were rolling out email and was like, oh my gosh, like I've been using this for a while. And I would say, really make sure that you're well-versed in AI. It will hugely impact your generation and all future generations. Know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, ask it how to use it. It will tell you. So best advice I can think of that I've heard about AI is that before you ask anyone else, ask the AI. Right? It will make you sound better. It will make you sound smarter. And one of the things I think is incredibly useful about that is that when I started my career, I would go into meetings and people would say acronyms and they would say things. I'd be like, man, I have no idea what's going on here. And I would just write it down and then I would go research it afterwards. You can just do that in real time with AI, right? And so I would say embrace that. If you don't embrace it, it's going to be a tough slog.
Cross-train. If you're a business major, take some science, especially basic science, and truly understand what Eric was referring to and has lived his life in, and that's the peer review process. Because science is self-correcting. And I had a smart professor say to me one time that 30% of science is wrong. It's figuring out which 30%. And if you don't understand how science moves forward with peer review process, you're going to be at a big disadvantage, whether you're serving on a jury or you're in business and you're trying to make sense of what someone's telling you, especially in agriculture, which is such a biological science.
I think one of the most important things that I've learned is to spend time in the field with people who are growing the food that we want to help them grow better. There was a farmer many years ago who I still work with today, and he said one of the best fertilizers for our crops is a farmer's shadow. So the best fertilizer is your shadow. What that means is if you're out in the field often and you've got your eyes on that crop and you're observing and watching, you're going to see things and the crop's going to be telling you something about what's going on. So paying attention is so, so critical. A disadvantage I think today's young folks have that we didn't have was AI. It's good and our phones are good, but don't forget, you got a really good mind. You got really good eyes. So use both the new technology, but use the old technology too, right? We've been around for 250,000 years, our species, something like that. We've evolved by looking at things, feeling things, smelling plants, smelling the soil. So if you can use those innate abilities that you have, you'll get a huge amount out of your journey, whatever that is. So have fun with it. You're going to make mistakes. We still make mistakes. Vulnerability is critical. When you make a mistake, I actually have to publish my mistakes. And that's a little bit humbling. But what is more important is we're not going to be around probably in 40 years, maybe, if we live past, 100 or so. But what we will have left behind, hopefully, is some truth. And so getting it right is actually more important than being right. So important. It's okay to be wrong. Just correct yourself and move on. I think that's a really good characteristic if we can learn to do it. So
Thank you so much for joining today. I know you guys are so busy and you have so much going on, but for taking the time to talk with us and share all of your wisdom and knowledge and for spending time with us today. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, before I have Lori Koster come up, who is the chair of the Grower Shipper Foundation, to close the event, can we have one more round of applause for a terrific group of panelists? As Gina alluded, there was time and travel to make all this happen. So thank you for a job well done. And with that, I'd like to invite Lori Koster up to close the event. Lori?
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today, especially everyone behind the scenes, all the microphone tech, AV people, those keeping Zoom functioning. Thank goodness it wasn't me. The Grower Shipper Foundation, we represent the grower shippers in Monterey County, and we're very proud to partner with CSUMB and Hartnell as we recruit, train, and inspire our future workforce. So thank you for hosting us here today. I'd like to thank Lisa Dobbins, our executive director, and Tom Horvath with the College of Science, Mary Lou over at the College of Business. And now it's time for our career fairs. So I'd encourage all of you to make your way out to the OSU Plaza. There's a lot of ad companies that are very, very interested in talking to you. Thank you.